There we go. Okay, I know the previous session ran long, and I'm assuming some people are still out getting their break drinks and treats and stuff. So, but I got to get started because we only have 35 minutes, and I want to make sure I get through everything. So today's presentation is Jakarta EE, not your parents' Java EE. Give a little bit of background on myself. I've been working in this area for a long time, whether it's the application servers, the individual Java EE components, the Jakarta EE, MICROPROFILE. I've been involved in a lot of this stuff over the years. I'm based in the Rochester, Minnesota lab, and one of the things that I'm finding out from people talking at this conference, most people think of Rochester, New York when I mention Rochester. So Rochester, Minnesota is actually in the middle of the United States. We're up towards Canada, but not quite there. And so that helps some people, but then they're kind of wondering, okay, why is IBM in this little town of Rochester? Well, one of the things, we are home to the Mayo Clinic. So maybe you have heard of that medical center. It's kind of world renowned. And so that's the home of the Mayo Clinic, is Rochester, Minnesota. So hopefully that gives a little better idea of where I'm from. Have to give a little bit of background on the name. When I first proposed this, and I proposed it to EclipseCon France first, and then it got picked up for EclipseCon Europe as well, I submitted this title, and it said, Jakarta EE, not your father's Java EE. Well, for those of us from the United States, this is kind of a common advertising theme that has been going on for years. In the early 70s, Oldsmobile came out with it originally, saying that their new Oldsmobile is not your father's Oldsmobile. And that concept started back in the 70s. Moving forward, even computer companies like HP picked up on it, and they started using it to advertise their new computer. And even today, this is current, there's a couple of drinks that are available in the United States for not your father's root beer or not your mom's apple pie. So I just thought this was just a well-known advertising slogan, and so that's why I called it not your father's Java EE. Well, the program committee got back to me and they said, okay, we like your abstract, but your title isn't very inclusive. And at first I didn't even know what they were referring to. And then I figured it out, and so I changed it, and I said, okay, how about if I call it not your parents' Java EE? And they said, winner, okay, so now you're in. So that's how I came up with the name. I want to talk about Jakarta EE and Java EE. I'm not trying to compare them to say one is better than the other. I want to show we are moving, we have moved. I mean, it's going to take a while to complete, but we are moving to Jakarta EE. So what is changing from a process standpoint, from a deliverable standpoint, from an artifact standpoint? What is going to be different? And that's what I want to talk about. The move to Eclipse and to Jakarta EE, we eventually will be moving all the specifications, the APIs, the TCKs, and the reference implementations. The one hiccup that we have right now are the specifications. It's a licensing legal issue with Oracle, and I'm not going to get into it because I don't know the details. Eventually we will get that information, but that's the hiccup right now. The rest of it, all of the code for the APIs, all the TCKs, all the reference implementation, everything has been moved over to Eclipse. So we are making fantastic progress from a coding standpoint. We just don't have all the documentation for the specs available yet. People have asked us or told us and said, well, what's so difficult about this? All the Java EE stuff was already in GitHub. Why can't you just change ownership and you're done with it? Well, a lot of that code that was in those repositories for Java EE, it was owned by Oracle. And they had to make sure that it was clean to contribute to Eclipse. So there was a lot of code scanning that had to be done. Had to make sure that the licensing was okay, that the copyrights were okay. I mean, we're still finding that not all the copyrights were caught, and they were, we still have to clean up some of those. We have to prove the certificate of originality. Does Oracle, do they have the rights to contribute it to an open source foundation? So there's a lot of background work that had to be done other than just changing ownership of the repositories. Once we get moving on that, then we have to follow the Eclipse process, and that's for creating a project. We have to do a proposal. If we do a proposal today, the project is not going to get created tomorrow. It has to go through a review process to make sure that this fits within the scheme of Eclipse. Does it fit within the overall top-level project of what you're proposing? Is it consistent with the direction of Eclipse? So there's a lot of things that have to be discussed in order to get a proposal accepted. Once it's accepted and it's been through the approval process, then we go through the provisioning part, and that's where the more fun happens, where we get the repositories created, the code gets moved over, we can start building it, start testing it, and eventually create a release with Eclipse. So this chart here shows our current status with moving everything over to Eclipse. This shows 39 projects. It continues to grow. Every week or month, I mean, we're coming up with another project. Either we're breaking them apart or a new one is coming in, and it's, we keep increasing it. But this is really the core. I don't see it growing considerably more than this. You'll notice that most of the projects are at 80%. The 100% mark says, okay, you have done an Eclipse release. You have finally gotten to the end of this cycle, and you have followed the Eclipse process for doing a release. The first projects that did that were the ones that were already part of Eclipse. That was pretty easy. So we've got Eclipse Link and JSON-P and JSON-B and yes, and those were already existing projects in Eclipse. So it was very easy for them to complete a release. But you also notice that JAX-RS and Servlet, so they're kind of out in the front, and they're saying, okay, we kind of understand what's going on with Eclipse. We understand the process, so we're completing that, and they've done their first release. Actually, JAX-RS has had 2 releases already. The other ones are coming very soon, and one of the things that we are getting to is having all of the projects available in order to build Eclipse Glassfish. That's the goal. So one of the things that was just announced earlier, well, late last week, early this week, sometime over the weekend, was release candidate 1 for Eclipse Glassfish 5.1. So what that shows is that all of the code for Glassfish has been brought over, and we are building with everything that is within Eclipse. And that's a major item, because before, yeah, we could build Eclipse, but we were pulling things from other repositories. And now we're pulling everything from within Eclipse, so it's really an Eclipse deliverable. So we've got the first RC1 candidate. You can go out and take a look at it, download it, try it out, give us feedback, because we want to continue to finish the release for 5.1. One of the things that we're going to do with Eclipse Glassfish 5.1 is we want to make it Java EE 8 compatible. We're going to go through a couple of step process on this. The first thing is we want to make sure that it's Java EE 8 compliant. What the goal is, most of you probably realize that for Java EE, there's a compatibility page. And all the various projects and vendors that are Java EE 8 compatible, they submit the results to Oracle, and they say, hey, please put us on your page. There's a compatibility page, and then, the IBM WebSphere, the Red Hat JBoss, all these different projects, they are put on that page to indicate compliance. We want to see the Jakarta EE logo up there, or maybe it'll be Eclipse Glassfish. I mean, I don't know exactly what it is, but the deliverable that we build via Eclipse Glassfish, we want that to be Java EE 8 compliant first. Okay, so that's step 1. The next thing that we want to do is all those tests that we contributed to Eclipse, We want to be able to build that test suite within Eclipse so that we have a Jakarta EE8 test compliance suite. Okay? So, yes, the code should be the same, but we got to make sure that we can build it within Eclipse. So that's the difference between these two compliance steps. The first one will be getting the test from Oracle that says, yeah, you're Java EE8 compliant. Now we got to build our own test suite and make sure that we're Jakarta EE8 compliant. So it's a two-step process. Once we do step 2, then the other vendors that are interested that have been Java EE8 compliant, they will want to run the new test suite to say, hey, yeah, I'm also Jakarta EE8 compliant. Another big difference is licensing. The APIs, the reference implementations, and the specs, they were available publicly from Oracle, a usage license either via CDDL or GPL. It was dual licensed. You'll notice the TCKs were not available before. Unless you signed some type of commercial license with Oracle, you did not have access to the TCKs. So you could not verify that your implementation works unless you did a license with Oracle, and then you were not allowed access to the Java EE brand either. So it was a process that, yes, there were many vendors that signed up, but there were also a subset of vendors that either couldn't or wouldn't pay the licensing fee to Oracle in order to pass the TCK. So what's different? I mentioned all the TCKs are now in Eclipse. Even me, as a developer at IBM, we had access to the TCKs, but it was a separate team. They had access to it. Myself as a developer, I had no idea what code was actually being run to test my product. If a failure happened, all that I could do was talk to my test team and say, okay, this test is failing, can you give me any clue as to what to look for? And they would look at their test case and they'd say, well, take a look at this section of the spec and see if you think you're satisfying it. That's the type of help that I got. I couldn't look at the source code. Now we can. We can go out to Eclipse. If a test fails, I can look at it and say, oh, wow, they're testing that aspect. Where, does the spec really say that that's a must, or is it a should, or whatever? So that's going to be fantastic for all of us that are trying to be compliant with Jakarta EE8. Now, I mentioned that no commercial license would be needed. That's not entirely true, because there will need to be some type of license with Eclipse. We're still working through the details on that. There needs to be some type of license to protect the Jakarta EE brand. So there will be something that people, vendors, individuals will have to agree with Eclipse, but it's not going to be a monetary thing that you have to sign up for. But there does have to be something in place to protect that brand. I'll touch on some of these older processes within the JCP. So the JCP is what governed the Java EE process. We now have Eclipse that's going to govern the Eclipse process for Jakarta EE. I'm going to touch on just a few items from the JCP process, the JCP, the JSRs, and the JSPA, the participation agreement, and how is that going to be different with Eclipse. So if you listen to Mike's presentation yesterday, the keynote, he talked about working groups. And there's several working groups within the Eclipse organization. IoT is one of them, I know. Jakarta EE is a working group. So you can kind of think of the working group as being equivalent to the JCP. So whatever rules and regulations that the JCP had, we have to have something similar within Eclipse. Now, we are not trying to duplicate the JCP. We know that there were problems with the JCP and the process and the slowness of getting stuff approved or changed through that process. We are trying to do a better job. We are getting input from a lot of different organizations to make that better. Sometimes though, yeah, there's process that's going to have to be put in place in order to protect the brand. Some key things that we're looking at though, vendor neutral, okay? I know the JCP was a separate organization from Oracle, but Oracle controlled the JCP. All of the IP from the JCP flowed to Oracle, and then Oracle relicensed it out to everybody. We're not doing it that way with Eclipse. It's going to be vendor neutral. It's going to be a more flexible flow of IP through the process, and we want to make sure that we continue that. The JSR, that's the Java specification request. This is the way that we did our designs for Java EE. Oh, one thing I forgot to point out on the previous slide. All these things that I'm talking about with the JCP, the JSR, JSPA, all of those will continue to exist. They are not going away. They will be targeted more for Java SE than Java EE, of course, but they're not going away. So I don't want you to get the impression that, you know, Eclipse is taking over the JCP. We are only providing the subset for Java EE or Jakarta EE. So the JSR is going to be replaced with the specification process, okay? This is what we have been working really night and day on in order to try to come up with a draft before EclipseCon. And Mike mentioned this yesterday, that we have a public draft available, came out middle of last week. Please, even just take a read through it. Even if you don't think that, you know, this doesn't apply to me, take a read and see if you think, you know, is it flowing right? Is it making sense? Because you never know when you're going to be dependent on this new specification process, and we would love input. We're looking for input to end by the end of the month. Then we have to bring all that stuff together, go through the review comments, try to get a new revision, and then hopefully, if it's nothing too major, we'll come out with a proposed final draft that we can then distribute to the community. The other thing that we have done is we have signed up a guinea pig project. JNoSQL is actually an Eclipse implementation project right now, but they are willing and wanting to try out the new specification process. They are willing to roll it with the punches. They know there's going to be some hiccups. They know that they might have to, you know, maybe even rework some stuff as we're trying to figure out if the process works. But the team seems very willing to work with us, and they want to try it out. So I think it'll be a bonus for both of us. They get to be the first ones, and then we can test out the process. The other thing, the JSPA, that had to be signed by every member company or individual that was working on a JSR. And what this did, this helped define the IP flow from all the contributions that are going into the JSRs and being able to get, you know, into Oracle, and then they can distribute it back out through their licensing mechanism. We're going to have something similar, and I put it in quotes up here because I don't think we've defined an exact name yet. But whether it's a modification to the Eclipse contribution agreement, or if we're going to have a new participation agreement type thing, but something will need to be done for specification projects, because the IP flow for specifications, it's a little different than what you have just for code. Speaking of specs, one thing that we learned, I was at Jean's presentation yesterday, and he pointed out the same little issue back in J2E 1.4, maybe even before that. There was a lot of specs that were written for J2EE at that time that did not have an implementation to prove that it was doable. I mean, yes, they had to eventually have a reference implementation, but it just didn't build upon industry experience. One example of that is like EJBs and entity beans. I put kind of a tough word up there saying that it failed. I know we have customers that are still using that technology, but from a interoperability perspective, That just did not work. Every implementation of EJB entity beans, whether it was from IBM or Red Hat or WebLogic, they were not compatible. You had to rewrite your beans if you're going to move from one platform to another. Now, compare that to what we did in Java EE 5 with EJB 3 and JPA. Now, that was built upon industry experience, especially with Hibernate for JPA. And they participated in the creation of that specification. And we brought that in. We were able to work through it. We have a very usable persistence model now, and it's been in place for several years. So that's what I want to really emphasize with the new Eclipse process, is we want to have some type of code first. We want, whether you're doing it as part of your individual projects or as a separate project out in the industry, something to show that the idea is worthwhile and it's ready or good to be standardized. That's what we want to drive towards. So, speaking of that, we have another sister project out there called MICROPROFILE. Won't go into a lot of detail on the comparison or the relationship between MICROPROFILE and Jakarta EE. If you want to get into more detail on that, I have another presentation this afternoon. I think it's at 3:45, right behind me on that stage. So if you want to get into more detail, please come then. But what I want to talk about here is that MICROPROFILE has kind of blazed the way for the processes that we're defining for Jakarta EE. We did a lot of experimentation and innovation with MICROPROFILE that now we are looking at, is it ready to be standardized? So one of the first things that we did was with the config.js, or the config portion of MICROPROFILE, we proposed that as a JSR. Well, that was before Oracle decided to open source Java EE, so we were following the old process. But now, does it make sense that maybe that config JSR, maybe it should be moved over to the new Eclipse specification process and it should become part of Jakarta EE? That's something that's being discussed. I'm not saying that's a done deal, but that's the type of thing that we're looking at for this relationship. Now, MICROPROFILE, Jakarta EE, you know, are we going to stop MICROPROFILE just because we're working on Jakarta EE? And absolutely not. In June, we came out with 2 major releases of MICROPROFILE, 1.4, 2.0. The individual components underneath them were exactly the same. The difference is what version of Java EE was it based off of. So 1.4 is based off of Java EE 7, 2.0 was based off of Java EE 8. So we have continued to make progress with MICROPROFILE as Jakarta EE continues to evolve. As a matter of fact, just last week, we completed another release of MICROPROFILE, 2.1. Now you notice we only have one item up there, open tracing. One of the things that we have decided from a MICROPROFILE perspective is to do time-boxed releases. So whatever is ready, that's what we're going to ship. At the time of doing MICROPROFILE 2.1, we only had open tracing 1.2 available. We did talk about it as a team and we said, okay, is that enough? And it's like, no, we decided right up front we're going to do time-boxed releases. So that's what we stuck with. One other thing that came out of that discussion, though, is that, just for your awareness, next year we're going to cut back to 3 releases per year for MICROPROFILE. We're going to do a February, June, and October. And I know that's kind of weird. We're kind of calling it our conference-driven releases, because there's conferences in springtime, February, we've got some in the summertime for the June, and then we've got the fall conferences, and so October. So that's what we decided to go for MICROPROFILE. I don't have a chart for this, but I got to give another plug to MICROPROFILE. You know, some of you guys know there's another conference going on in San Francisco. You know, it used to be Java 1, now it's Oracle Code 1. MICROPROFILE won a Duke's Choice Award. It was just announced last night. So I think that's pretty cool. I want to talk a little bit about the teams that are within the Eclipse Foundation. There's a little bit of confusion between, you'll hear the term Jakarta EE then you'll hear the term EE4J. And what is the difference? The Jakarta EE is the brand name. That's the working group. So within the working group, we have a steering committee that oversees all of the activities. We've got the specification committee. We have the marketing committee. It's that whole brand for for Jakarta EE. EE4J was a name that we came up with when the code and stuff was first getting moved over to Eclipse. We didn't have a brand name yet. We had to name it something that was legal. We couldn't call it Java Enterprise or anything like that because I had the word Java in it. So we came up with EE4J, and that's our top level project in Eclipse. Okay, so that's more of a, I don't know if you want to call it an implementation detail, but you know, it's more just for the projects within Eclipse. Now, if you're just talking to your friends, you could say EE4J or Jakarta EE, and basically you're talking about the same thing. Within Eclipse, we know that there's a difference, but out in the industry, you could probably get away with using either term. There are a couple of links if you want to read more about this relationship between the two. So one thing that I want to mention, let's see. Okay, got a few more minutes. Talk about the participation level of these two communities. I first wanted to go out and look and say, okay, who makes up the Java EE community? And this was kind of eye-opening. I was trying to find a page that would show all of the companies that are participating in the JSRs, and I couldn't find anything like that. And what's kind of weird, this is the Java EE community page, and what company do you see? It's only Oracle. That's it. So from a Java EE perspective, it really was an Oracle-run, Oracle-owned process and artifact. Now, take a look at this, Jakarta EE. It's a website, jakarta.ee. If you go there, you will see all of these companies that are participating. Now, you also notice Oracle is up there. Yes, Oracle, of course, is participating. They're contributing all this. They want to get this all contributed into Eclipse, but they're at the same level as everybody else. It's just one voice. They don't control everything anymore. It's a community of participants, and that's a big difference. So this portion of the talk, I probably have to either remove it or change it because it's getting a little too skewed. I first put this together in June because I wanted to show that the participation level in the Jakarta EE discussion groups was more than what we were having in Java EE. And it worked very good in June. You'll notice now that when I start comparing the different groups, it's just ballooning so fast in Jakarta EE that it's not really a fair comparison anymore, but I'm still going to run through it for today's presentation. So what I'm trying to do is show the different aspects. We've got the whole community. I want to look at that participation level. And then let's look at the platform participation level, so that's a little bit smaller. And then let's look at an individual component participation level and see how that compares. So first of all, for the overall community participation, over on the left-hand side, you'll notice that the number of subscribers to the mailing lists. Okay, so I took all of Java EE, and let's see, the number was about 599, and as of this past week, we have 676 subscribers in all of the community. So that shows that there is plenty of interest in the Jakarta EE community. Now, if we drop down to the platform level, this is getting a little more specific. And looking at the PMC conversations, that type of thing, you'll still notice that we have a pretty healthy, 47 to 84. This has made a jump of about 20 people just since June that we've had an increase. And then if we go down to the individual component with JAX-RS, they are even continuing to increase. I think they increased by about 10 people since June. So there's continued increase in participation level. So the other thing I looked at were the number of messages that were being posted, and this is where it's just really getting skewed out of whack, and I'll just put it up here, but you know, the very first one over there, there was one message posted to Java EE that said, hey, we released Java EE 8. That's it. So no more messages. So that's why there's only one. And then all of the activity within the Jakarta EE community, it's been, you know, almost a couple thousand messages since, you know, about June. When we look at the platform level, kind of the same thing. That has really kind of died off since they announced it. There's been a few discussions because of clarifications, but not a whole lot. A lot more participation on our PMC mailing list. And then if you go all the way down to JAX-RS, same thing there. You know, they've died off because JAX-RS 2.1 came out with Java EE 8. Been some little bit of conversation since then, but most of it has been in our user group within Jakarta EE. The other thing that shows community participation is even coming up with the name. We went through a process, we're trying to come up, okay, what's going to be the new name? We knew we couldn't use Java in the name. We can't use Java X. You know, what is it that we're going to come up with? So we opened an issue and we said, put your suggestions out there. And man, did we get a lot of them. We got, you know, some of them were pretty rough. I mean, they were, you know, digging each other with the different names that were being proposed. Some of them were already used by other companies, other trademarks. Some were using the word Java or Java X. So there's a lot of them that we were throwing out. But we ended up with two names, Jakarta EE and Enterprise Profile, and we opened up a community vote for it. And we said, okay, these are the ones that you picked. What do you think we ought to do? And we had 7,000 unique votes, and that had to be unique based on the email address that was being used. And then they even went so far to make sure that they weren't using the trick that you know, Gmail allows with the plus sign. They wanted to make sure that those weren't counted. And so we had 7,000 unique votes, and you know, we came up with the name Jakarta. The other thing to point out here that was kind of nice is those of you that have been around for a while, Jakarta was a project at Apache, and it was related to the old Java runtime library type code. Well, when OpenJDK got going, that project died off. So when Jakarta came up as a suggestion, we thought, well, we can't use that. Apache already owns it. We approached Apache, and you know, luckily we've got one of our guys, David Blevins, that's very involved with Apache, and he approached them, and they thought it was a wonderful idea. So they transferred the ownership over to Eclipse and said, please do, it'd be a great way to resurrect that name and that mentality, and so that's what we ended up doing. The other thing that we did from a community participation viewpoint is we had to come up with a logo. Could no longer use the coffee cup, of course. Now the unique thing here is that originally Eclipse paid a design team to come up with some logos, and they were presented to the community, and the community said, oh, wait a minute, I mean, some of us, not me, but some of us are kind of artistic, you know, can't we submit other logo ideas? And so we opened it up, and other people contributed other ideas, and we ended up having a vote off of, I don't know how many we had, 7. So we had 7 finalists, and we opened it up for a vote. What was really cool, the guy that won is from Red Hat, nothing to do with Jakarta EE. He was more of a designer and artistic guy, and he's the one that came up with our new sailboat. So that was kind of cool because that was all community driven. So just to complete, we're going from your parents, our parents, Java EE to Jakarta EE. And that's what I had for today. Don't forget to do the evaluation. I don't know, I might have time for